Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. This week, I thought I'd take it easy and simply talk about what is probably my favorite WoW short story. Now, by absolutely no means have I read every WoW short story. I do tend to keep up with most of the newly released ones if they don't require some sort of purchase, but thankfully, they're usually not necessary to understanding the main story. If anything, they're useful as insights to the minds of certain characters. Anyway, before I get into it, I'm just going to throw honorable mentions to Edge of Night by Dave Kosak and Dark Mirror by Steve Denuser as great reads, at least if you like Sylvanas. But I'd instead like to focus on another Windrunner sister today. Sister is Another Word for Always by Catherine M. Valente is one of 12 short stories included in World of Warcraft, Folk and Fairy Tales of Azeroth, and focuses on the youngest of the three sisters, Vereesa. Notably, it released approximately 6 months after Shadowlands itself. I think it most likely occurs before Shadowlands, but it's not colossally important when. The whole feel of the story is very ephemeral, and I think you can quite reasonably make the argument that it should be viewed as non-canonical. I mean, the book that it's from is literally called Folk and Fairy Tales, which would certainly imply that's how we're supposed to interpret it. Vereesa is, as she oft is, overwhelmed with grief. Her whole family has been taken from her, save for her 2 boys who she has a charming tendency to completely forget about. And she finds the loss of Sylvanas to be the most painful of all. Throughout the story, she refers to Sylv as the Sister of Courage, for courage is how she died, and to herself as the Sister of Sorrow. She thinks back to when they were children, sitting alongside a stream. Sylvanas gently lifts a silvery mithril trout from the waters, much to Vereesa's wonderment. Sylvanas, being who she is and just a tinge cruel, holds onto it a bit too long, and Vereesa bids her to let it go, as it's against the rules to bring it back with them. As they're about to go, Sylvanas slips, and Vereesa instinctually catches her. Modern-day Vereesa finds herself before 2 frozen elven statues, one labeled with regret and another labeled with acceptance, and with them a gate of black glass. Vereesa is visited by a Kyrian watcher named Olomia. Though Vereesa does not know of the beings of the Shadowlands, she is at least experienced enough to know that she is a psychopomp of sorts, as such figures had been seen in the past by those on the threshold of death. Vereesa shares her woes, and because she did not attempt to coerce the Kyrian as others have, Olomia agrees to give Vereesa a chance to find and retrieve her sister on the conditions that Sylvanas comes willingly and that the 2 of them not touch. Vereesa agrees and steps through the gate into the Shadowlands, coming at first to Ardenweald. She marvels at its beauty and comes to the reasonable conclusion that this is where Sylvanas must be. They were elves and creatures of the forest, and so with death, to the forest they would return. And I think the Sylvanas novel reinforces this. Sylvanas always felt most comfortable not in the city, but in the majestic woods of Quel'Thalas. However, Vereesa is not here long before a hole opens up beneath her and swallows her up, transporting her into the maw. Vereesa is certain that her sister couldn't possibly be here. She was not deserving of such a cruel fate. Nevertheless, she traverses the wastes, asking anyone she's able to find, and even the environment itself, if they've seen her sister, all to no avail. Eventually she comes to rest, and is approached from behind by a certain bald, shirtless man. She asks him as well, and he says that her sister is not there yet. Eventually she does look at him, and in particular notices the hole in his chest. And in the most Vereesa response you could possibly imagine, states that she has a hole like that in her as well. She is absolutely the kind of person that would visit you in the hospital and unwittingly draw attention to how bad she herself has it. And I love her for it. Zoval is not offended though, and maintains that everyone has a hole like that. His is simply made easier to see. Vereesa asks if he's the ruler of this place, and after contemplating the question, he answers that he is, but that it is also his master, which is apt. He is both the jailer and a prisoner, the banished one. When she asks if he has something akin to a sister, he notes that his former family, the other Eternal Ones, are the reason for the pain in his chest, and claims that family are simply those with the greatest capacity to hurt you. He bids her to leave this place, as she does not belong here, which is kind of interesting. You'd think he'd want to keep her around as leverage. Perhaps he literally couldn't keep her, though a soul still being living hasn't really impeded him from capturing them at any other point in the story. Perhaps he simply wants to keep Sylvanas cooperative and not antagonistic. I personally prefer the interpretation that he's taking his role seriously and doesn't wish to keep an innocent living soul in his domain. But that kind of goes against almost everything we've seen of him, so I don't give it a ton of weight. Anyway, before she goes, Zovaal retrieves a fragment of Sylvanas' soul from Gorgoa, which, if we want to view this story as literally as possible, would probably be her good half-soul that was taken from her at the time of her death and returned to her at the end of Sanctum of Domination. That's actually a nice bit of foreshadowing, as this story came out before the raid. But yeah, Sylvanas' soul is described as being silvery and clearly meant to invoke memory of the mithril trout from the start of the story. Vereesa chases her down, and the two eventually come to one another. Vereesa is on the ball though, and refuses to actually touch Sylvanas, lest she fail the conditions of her quest. Sylvanas manifests properly, though at this point Zovaal decides to intervene. Vereesa attacks him, though her arrows and knife ultimately do no damage to him, as he winds up his mace to swing it at Sylvanas. If this actually did anything to Sylvanas, we're not really sure, but more importantly, it caused Sylvanas to stagger and Vereesa to instinctually catch her, failing her quest. Vereesa is of course distraught and asks why the jailer even revealed her sister's soul to her in the first place, only to have her snatched away. Zovaal responds that he wanted to see her fail, as all souls in the Maw are defined by failure, and that he wanted Sylvanas to see that family will always falter and fail you. Vereesa and Sylvanas have some parting words, with Sylvanas telling her that she cannot take her with her, as it's against the rules of this place. Sylvanas' soul turns into a crystal, which again makes sense with the Sanctum of Domination conclusion. Elomia arrives and takes the younger sister back to the realm of the living, and Vereesa resolves to move from regret to acceptance. She awakes from the dreamlike condition she has been in throughout the story, seemingly unable to remember anything that transpired. And this transient state of hers helps to explain why Ardenweald and the Maw didn't, completely freak her the heck out. Anyway, thanks to the memories of the short story not being kept, the story absolutely could be canon. In fact, I know of very little story content that Blizz releases that it does not at least initially intend to be canon. It does feel a little nonsensical and surreal to have actually happened. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It's an enjoyable read that gives us some charming character insights. Foremost among these is, of course, the relationship between Vereesa and Sylvanas. This has always been one of my favorite dynamics. It featured heavily in war crimes, where the two conspired together to assassinate Garrosh, lest the verdict of his trial spare his life. The way that Vereesa yearns for her sister's love and manages to actually tear down Sylvanas' walls was delightful to read. Like, Sylvanas tears off a wolf's head in despair when Vereesa backs out of their plan to bring her to the Undercity. Their story continued into the Three Sisters comic, where Vereesa's apology for her cowardice is what causes Sylvanas to hold back her plan of killing and raising both her and Ilaria. And their interactions in the Sylvanas novel were some of the cutest the book had to offer. And this short story puts them all on full display. Vereesa, of course, idolizes her sister, and wants nothing more than to go back to the way things were, feeling a hole in her heart where she once was, and being willing to plumb the depths of the afterlife to bring her back. And Sylvanas truly cares for her as well, spending their final moments together in the Maw trying to soothe Vereesa's anxiety before they're ripped apart once more. The two are also quite obviously placed in the roles of Orpheus and Eurydice from Greek mythology. Both Orpheus and Vereesa brave the underworld to retrieve their lost loved ones, and are permitted to bring them back on a simple condition. Orpheus may not look back at Eurydice until they return to the surface. Vereesa may not come into physical contact with Sylvanas. Orpheus fails at the last moment because of his lack of faith, and Vereesa fails out of a careless habit, though both essentially because they are overwhelmed by their love. I also appreciate the story for what it feels like it's trying to do with Zovaal. It's certainly not trying to paint him as the good guy all along, or even entirely sympathetic, but it's clearly trying to give us something to latch onto. He's not the ultra-generic, booming, deep-voice Warcraft villain that we're so accustomed to here. He allows himself to open up to Vereesa, albeit in fairly general statements. He was wounded by his siblings when they deemed him unfit for his position and bound him to the Maw. He was almost certainly too extreme in his ambitions, but the impetus for his decisions had to come from something, be that seeing a flaw in the mechanism of death or wanting to protect the cosmos against what is to come. Yeah, that latter one isn't so great. But I do believe there was, at one point in time, more to the jailer than we wound up seeing. if for no other reason than that you can't possibly design a character that flat. Surely. I mean, we have all of those Primus mastermind theories floating around. Whether we want to give those any weight or not, this story shares with us just a peek at what may have once been. What could have been. Which is almost more than what we got out of the entire actual expansion. And hey, if nothing else, it's just an amusing duo we get here. Vereesa, of all characters, plopping herself down and having a heart-to-heart with one of the biggest cosmic presences we've seen. Like, what the heck? And that's that. My favorite of the WoW short stories that I've read. I mean, I'm absolutely biased here. Sylvanas and Vereesa are both counted among my favorite characters, particularly when they're together, and I was also starving for any sort of expansion of Zoval's characterization. This story gave me plenty of the former and at least a little bit of the latter. The prose was also quite solid, even if it wasn't my primary concern. And it wasn't super preachy like The Goblin Way, or bleeding positivity like Faith and Flame. What's your favorite Warcraft short story, and why? I'm probably not going to read it, but I am curious to know. For this week's drawing, it was the easy choice of Vereesa Windrunner. I mean, Zoval would be the only other consideration, and I've already drawn him, so... And yeah, I absolutely stan Vereesa. She's the second best Windrunner, and it's not even close. Due partially to her fondness for Sylvanas, and in very large part to just how much of a mess of a person she is. Like, I get it, she's had a rough and trying life. Both of her parents died in the Second War, her younger brother died not much later, and for a long time Sylvanas held her accountable for his death. Then Sylvanas dies in the Third War, her husband Ronan dies at the bombing of Theramore, leaving her all alone to raise their creepy twin boys. Also, she had to raise Eretor when Ilaria went off to fight the Legion. But even all that being considered, Vereesa does not handle it well. Like, she wore a bright red dress to her husband's funeral. And she was so desperate for her sister's love that she kind of just forgot that she had 2 children until Anduin's presence reminded her of the fact. I like to think of her as the wine mom of the Warcraft universe. She is an absolute train wreck, but she's so pathetic and huggable and lovable that it's easy to forgive her for minor indiscretions, like being one of the 2 key figures responsible for the Purge of Dalaran. As for the drawing itself, I'm quite satisfied with how it turned out. Vereesa has used different bows over the years, and she doesn't really have a canonical one. I think some art depicts her with Thoridal, the legendary bow from Sunwell, but that's more often associated with Haldoran Brightwing. And I don't know, this one just looked fitting with her. Although of note, Tyrande also uses that bow model at certain points in the game's history. Whatever. And I guess technically I had a lot of options for where I could have drawn her. I know Midnight will bring a ton of options, most notably Windrunner Spire, but I don't actually want to use any Midnight locations until the expansion comes out and I experience them myself. So then it was basically the Ghostlands, or maybe Crystal Song Forest, since that's where Dalaran used to be, and there is a Silver Covenant flight path there. So yeah, I just went with the Ghostlands, it seemed more fitting. Which, despite being intentionally dark and gloomy, manages to still be an aesthetically pleasing zone to me. I'm sure my intense nostalgia for the Burning Crusade has nothing to do with that opinion, and I do believe that's all I have to say on the matter. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye!